The story we will be using for this lesson is called Goodnight Gorilla. The objective in this lesson is that students will be able to use the illustrations and details in the text to describe its key ideas. The title of the story is called Goodnight Gorilla and it is illustrated and the author is Peggy Rathman. The rationale for the book choice is that the giants in this story are artistic and easy to comprehend. Inferring the meaning of the story by using the illustrations can be easily done by students. The characters in the story show various expressions and gestures that can be seen by the reader and decode what it is trying to tell us. So in this lesson, I created a before reading plan. So what I will be doing before starting the lesson and reading the book to the students. Before I begin, I looked up and researched information about the book and found out the different awards this book has won. Some of them that I will mention is that it won the ALL Notable Children's Book for 1994, Bulletin Blue Ribbon in 1994, Horn Book Fanfare in 1995 selection, Parenting Magazine's Best Children's Books of 1994, and New York Public Library's 1995 Children's Books 100 Titles for Reading and Sharing. And the way I'm going to teach this lesson is that I would begin to show the students the cover of the book and ask them what they think of this story and what it will be about. Once I hear their responses, I will let the students know that this book only contains pictures and we will need to infer the meaning of each page to figure out what the story is telling us. The strategy I plan on using is describing what the picture on each page is talking about and is asking us, and ask the students what that means the characters are doing. For example, I will tell the students, in this picture, I see the gorilla is taking the guard's keys while he's in the cage. What do you think he's trying to do by just looking at the picture? This will allow the students to create a meaning for the pictures. For predictions, I will ask the students why the characters are doing a certain action and what they think will happen next. If I use the example previously mentioned, I will ask the students, what do you think the gorilla might want to do after he gets out? So as I previously mentioned, the story I will be reading is called Good Night Gorilla by Peggy Rathman. In this first picture, we can see that a gorilla is locked up in a cage and is holding on to the bars while he reaches out with one arm to grab the guard's keys from his back pocket. So what can we infer from this picture? We can see that the guard is saying good night gorilla, so he's going away and he's walking away from the gorilla while the gorilla is trying to grab his keys. So something that we can infer from this picture is that the gorilla is reaching out to steal the guard's keys so he can let himself out of the cage and roam free around the zoo. So for these next two pages, what can we infer from the pictures? What can we look that is happening? So in the first picture, we can see that the cage door is opened, but the keys are still in the door lock, and we can see that the gorilla is stepping out of the cage with the keys from the guard. In this second picture, we can see the gorilla walking behind the guard without the guard looking. So what can we infer from these pictures? What we can infer is that the gorilla was able to escape from his cage with the keys he stole from the guard and is walking behind the guard so he doesn't get caught and get put back in the cage. So now that we look at this page, what are some things that we can observe? We can see that the guard is still walking in the front while saying goodnight elephant. And we can see the gorilla looking back at the elephant while still holding on to the keys. And we can see an elephant that is behind cages with the door of the cages closed. So by looking at this picture, what can you predict will happen? Or what do you think the gorilla is thinking about doing? I would also ask the students, how did you come up with this prediction? This is when students will be able to infer from the picture and let me know how the gorilla is thinking about letting the elephant out of the cage. The different inferences they might be able to give me is that the gorilla is looking back at the elephant, he is holding on to the keys to the cages, and the guard is not looking, and many more different inferences they can make. Now in this picture, we can see that the guard is saying "Good night, lion," while we see a lion inside of a cage with a door that is locked while holding a bone. What else can we see in this picture? I can see the gorilla with the keys from the guard going into the lion's cage and opening up the door. So, what can we infer from this picture? Well, we can infer that the gorilla is trying to let out the lion because we can see that he is opening up the door for him while still holding on to the keys that he stole from the guard. Now, in this picture, we see many more animals. We can see a lion, a hyena, an elephant, and we are seeing a giraffe that is being let out of its cage, and we can see that there is a key at the door of the cage. And we also see the guard who is saying "Good night, hyena," and "Good night, giraffe." So we can see that many of the animals are following the guard without him noticing while the guard continues to say good night to all of the animals. So by looking at these pictures, what can we infer? We can see that all these animals were being set free by the gorilla. Whenever the guard said goodnight and he walks away, the gorilla opens up their cage doors to let them free. So he waits until the guard is walking in front so he can let the animals out. Right, so in this next picture, we can kind of see a pattern that we've been seeing along the book. We can see that there are many more animals behind the guard and that the guard is saying goodnight to an animal. In this case, he's saying goodnight armadillo, and the gorilla is behind him holding up the key. So, if we see this picture, what can we infer from it? Well, if we're seeing that the gorilla is holding up the key and smiling, we can probably infer that the gorilla is once again going to let out this animal. So he will be letting out the armadillo. Now, in this next picture, we can observe that the animals are walking in a line, and we can see that there are multiple houses. Something else that we can see is that there is the word zoo, so we kind of can see that they were in the zoo. So now looking at the picture, what can we infer? We can infer that the animals are walking inside of the house where the guard is opening the door because we can clearly see that the guard is holding on to a doorknob and is walking in. So we can infer that the animals are going to follow the guard inside of his house. In this picture, I can see that the animals are walking in a line inside of a house where there is a front door open. Inside of the house, I can also see multiple different pictures. So this kind of lets me know that these might be family pictures. So what can we infer from looking at these drawings and what we're observing in the pictures? We can infer that the animals follow the guard to his house and are now walking by the door that was left open. In this picture, we can see that the guard's wife is saying good night, dear. And we can see the guard laying down because we can see that his head. We can also see the gorilla laying next to the wife and also multiple animals. So the guard and his wife are not paying attention to all the animals. So they are laying all over their bedroom and trying to go to sleep. So what can we infer from looking at these pictures? We can infer that the animals did not want to sleep in their cages, so they follow the guard into his room so they would feel more comfortable sleeping on a more comfortable floor and as the gorilla is doing on top of the bed. So in this next picture, we don't really get to see a whole lot. We just see a dark screen, like dark pages, and a whole lot of conversation bubbles saying good night. And as we looked at the previous page, the guard's wife said, "Good night, dear." And then a bunch of little good night conversation bubbles popped up. So what can we infer? We can infer that the animals are so tired that they forgot not to speak and respond back to the wife that did not know that they were zoo animals that were in her bedroom. In this picture, there's really not much that we can see in this picture, but we just see a pair of eyes. And as we can look at them a little bit deeper, we can see that they are big, bright eyes. So we can see that the bedroom is pitch black, so we can just see the eyes. So what can we infer from just looking at this? We can infer that it is probably the wife that just realized that there were multiple responses to her saying good night. So she is saying, "Who else is in my room right now?" In this picture, the guard's wife looks like she is in shock while she turns on the light and sees that there is a gorilla lying next to her, and there are also multiple animals in her bedroom. The gorilla has a big grin on his face, while the giraffe and elephant have their eyes open, but they have their heads down while looking at the wife. After describing the story in this picture to the students, I would ask them why they believe the gorilla has a big grin on his face and why the elephant and giraffe have sad looks on their faces. I would allow them to come up with their own conclusions or also guide them to the idea that the animals have a look of guilt in their faces because they just got caught. This is when I would make a personal connection with the students and ask them, "Have you ever gotten caught doing something like the animals in this story? And what was the guilty face you made when you got caught?" In this picture, we can see that the guard's wife is holding the gorilla's hand, and we see all the animals that are following behind them. Something else that we can observe is that they are leaving the house they were just in and walking into the zoo. So, what can we infer from these pictures that we are looking? We can infer that the wife is taking all the animals back into the zoo where they belong so they can go back to sleep and not be in their bedroom. In this picture, we see the guard's wife walking back into her house. And we also see the gorilla that is following her and doing a shh motion. So he has his index finger across his mouth. So, what can we infer from this? We can infer that the guard's wife is going back to her house so she can go to bed. And we can also see that it's nighttime because, as we can see in the picture, the guard's wife has a flashlight. And the hand motion that the gorilla is doing just means that it is a secret that he doesn't want the audience, so us, the readers, to know that he is following the guard's wife. Now we can see that the windows are down. We can also see that the guard's wife is saying "Good night, dear," while the guard responds "Good night." We can also see that the wife is yawning and also turning off the light. And we also see the gorilla at the edge of the bed going inside of the bed. So, what can we infer from this picture? We can probably infer that now that the guard and the wife are going to go to bed. But if we see at the gorilla, we can infer that he's going to go to bed with him, that he snuck out of the zoo once again, and that he will accomplish to sleep in a comfortable bed. So in this last picture, what are some things that we can see? We can see that the flashlight is off. We can see that the windows are halfway down and that is nighttime. We can also see the guard's wife who has her eyes closed. We can see the guard just laying down in bed, and we can also see the gorilla and the tiny little mouse that has been following the gorilla all along, and him saying "Goodnight, gorilla," and the gorilla just doing that sound, which just represents that the gorilla is sleeping. So, what does this last picture infer? It just infers that everyone in this family is finally going to bed while the gorilla got what he wanted and he got to sleep in the guard's bed inside of his house. After reading this story, I would do a KWL chart with the students to see how well they understood the story. I know that doing KWL charts are helpful to see how well students comprehended a lesson, or in this case, the story we just read. I would make a chart for the students with the letters K, W, and L. And for the K, I would ask them, what are some things we know about the animals we just saw in the story? The students will be able to provide anything they noticed in the story, like how they lived in the zoo, that they didn't want to be in their cages, or that they wanted to be sleeping in the bedroom instead of their cage. For W, I would ask them, what are some things you would want to know regarding the story? Some answers could be why the animals wanted to leave their cages, why the gorilla let all of them free. If they were observant, they would why there would be a small mouse following the gorilla everywhere with a banana. Lastly, for the letter L, I would ask the students to give me a few things they learned about the story. Some of the answers could include that stealing is bad, sneaking out without permission is bad, and not to go into other houses without permission. For my lesson plan feedback, I got two things that I had forgotten to do. The first one was the objective, and I included it in my video, which was the objective in this lesson is that students will be able to use the illustrations and details in the text to describe its key ideas. So I made sure to add this to this lesson. And the second feedback was that I didn't do one of my references correctly. I had forgotten to do it. So here I added the three resources that I used. One of them was to find the different awards the book had won. And the second one that I forgot was to add the resource for the article that I read. And lastly, I just added the resource for the story that I read in this lesson.